Why did everyone stop talking the moment she stepped into the hangar? It wasn't because she looked dangerous. She didn't. No weapon slung over her shoulder, no insignia on her chest, no rank to announce her importance. She wore a plain utility jacket, boots scuffed from use, hands empty. The kind of person people stop seeing once they decide she doesn't matter. Master Sergeant Blake Coulter decided that in under 3 seconds. He barely looked up from the diagnostic tablet before speaking. "We don't need another janitor, we need a technician." His voice carried easily in Hangar 4, sharp with impatience, polished by years of being obeyed. Then he glanced at her properly and smirked. "But since you're already here, start with that floor." A mop was shoved toward her like a joke. No one expected her to refuse. A few younger airmen laughed. Not loudly, just enough to be noticed, enough to stay on Coulter's good side. She felt it, the judgment, the dismissal, but she didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't lift her chin or drop her eyes. She took the mop. Her grip was steady, too steady. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, and she held it like it was familiar, like it belonged in her hands. She didn't look at Coulter. Her gaze settled instead on the far end of the hangar, where the Tier 4 armament vault loomed behind reinforced steel and deadlock systems. A monument to failure, cold, silent, untouched despite 3 hours of frantic effort. She began to mop. Slowly, precisely, each stroke straight, each turn efficient, no wasted motion, no anger in it, no embarrassment either, just control. Colonel Raiden Holt noticed. He had been walking past, reviewing the countdown clock projected against the hangar wall, when something about her movement caught his eye. Not the mop, the posture, balanced, centered. One foot subtly forward, weight distributed like someone trained to move under pressure. Not a cleaner, not a contractor. Someone else. Holt stopped walking. The hangar hummed with tension. The mission window was closing. Satellites were already sliding out of alignment. Without the Ecolock system online, the interceptor aircraft outside were grounded, expensive, useless silhouettes under floodlights. Coulter's team had tried everything. Software resets, power cycling, manual overrides, even analog fail-safes. Nothing touched the red light blinking on the vault's interface. And now command had sent her. Coulter watched her mop for a few seconds too long, irritation curdling into something sharper. "All right," he snapped finally. "Specialist, you're up. Let's see what command's infinite wisdom sent us." She stopped mopping. Not abruptly, just finished. She leaned the mop against the wall with careful alignment, handle perfectly vertical. A small thing, almost ceremonial. Then she walked toward the vault. No tablet, no tools, no notes, just herself. The laughter died. Conversations faded. Even the diagnostic fan seemed to quiet. She didn't touch the keypad. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she stepped closer, raising her hand toward the steel frame, fingers hovering just above the seams where reinforced panels met. She traced the metal slowly, eyes unfocused, not searching but remembering. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat did not. There was a time when her name lived on blueprints instead of clearance rosters. A time before Thar Valley, before silence became safer than speaking. She had learned long ago that recognition was temporary, but consequences were permanent. Her fingers paused. Then she tapped. Not on the interface, not on the access panel. Low on the frame, heel of her hand, tap, 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 tap. It sounded wrong, almost disrespectful. Coulter opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. The sound changed. The vault responded. A subtle shift, a resonance only someone listening for it would hear. She pressed her index finger into a narrow seam, nearly invisible, and struck a precise point beside it. Not hard, not violent, just enough. The red light blinked. Once, then went dark. The vault exhaled. Steel unlocked. Hydraulics engaged. The massive door slid open with controlled reverence, revealing rows of guidance pods and munitions untouched by human hands for hours. No one spoke. Coulter stared, color draining from his face. "That's not possible," he muttered. "There's no manual override, there's no—" She turned to face him for the first time. Her eyes were calm, tired, human. "There is," she said quietly, "if you built it." Silence fell heavier than before. Colonel Holt stepped forward, slowly, respectfully. "I haven't seen that protocol used in 20 years," he said. "Not since Thar Valley." He turned to his aide. "Authorization Sierra Tango 97, pull the record." The captain's fingers froze mid-swipe. "Sir, most of this is classified," he swallowed. "Name Dr. Iller Vance. Call sign Black Viper 1. The room seemed to shrink around her. She didn't correct them, didn't deny it. Coulter's swagger collapsed inward, replaced by something raw. Understanding, maybe, or regret. She had never needed to prove herself. She had only needed to be needed. And when the mission launched on time that night, no one cheered. They simply remembered. How does someone disappear after saving everything? Dr. Iller Vance didn't stay to watch the aircraft take off. She submitted the fix in 7 clipped sentences, uploaded directly to a secure channel, then walked toward the exit like she'd always planned to leave alone. Her heart didn't race, but something inside her loosened, a knot she'd carried since Thar Valley. The mission wasn't redemption, it wasn't forgiveness, it was simply right. As she reached the door, a young airman caught up to her, the same one who had laughed. "I'm sorry," he said, breathless. "I didn't know." She looked at him, really looked. "That's the problem," she said gently. "Most people don't." He hesitated. "How did you know where to tap?" A pause, then a faint smile. "The designer always leaves a key under the mat," she said. "You just have to know the house." She left. No medals, no ceremony. Only a quiet shift. In the weeks that followed, Coulter brought every new recruit to the vault, pointed at a blank panel. "That's the Viper point," he'd say, "not in the schematics." And no one laughed. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence follow her even after the vault opened? It lingered in the hangar like smoke after a fire, thick and impossible to ignore. Even as crews rushed to load guidance pods, even as officers barked new orders to claw back lost minutes, no one quite knew how to speak around what had just happened. The mission was moving again, but something else had shifted, something quieter, heavier. Dr. Iller Vance stood near the edge of the hangar, unnoticed again, as if the moment had already passed her by. That was familiar. Moments always did. People liked results. They struggled with origins. Inside her chest, relief didn't arrive the way people imagined. There was no rush of pride, no satisfaction. Just a steady ache easing slightly, like pressure released from an old wound that never fully healed. Thar Valley had taught her that success didn't erase cost. It only proved survival. Colonel Holt watched her from across the hangar. He didn't approach right away. He'd learned over decades of command that some people needed space more than praise. And whatever Dr. Vance was, she wasn't someone who chased acknowledgement. She stood with her hands loosely at her sides, gaze fixed not on the activity, but on the open vault, the system breathing again because it recognized her. Holt remembered Thar Valley vividly. Not from headlines, from after-action silence. Ecolog had been rushed into deployment then. Brilliant, fragile, built by minds that thought in layers instead of rules. When the siege turned chaotic, when power grids collapsed and command channels fractured, Ecolog had done something no one predicted. It locked itself down, protected what it was told to protect, at the cost of everything else. They'd lost good people trying to force it open. And then Black Viper had walked into the dust and fixed it. She hadn't stayed then either. Holt took a breath and crossed the hangar. "Dr. Vance," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "Not too close, not too formal." She turned. Her expression was neutral, but there was a flicker of guarded awareness, the kind that never fully shuts off. "Colonel, you saved the mission today." "I corrected a failure," she replied. "The system behaved exactly as designed." Holt nodded. "Design reflects intent." For the first time, her eyes hardened slightly. Intent changes, systems remember. That was the truth she lived with. The reason she stayed in shadows. Technology didn't forget, and neither did she. Across the hangar, Coulter watched them, jaw tight. The humiliation still burned, but beneath it was something worse, realization. He replayed the moment again and again. The mop, the laughter, the assumption. He had prided himself on reading people, on command presence, on knowing who mattered. He'd been wrong. And wrong in a way rank couldn't fix. The countdown clock hit its final mark. Aircraft engines roared to life outside, vibrations rolling through the concrete floor. As jets lifted into the night, a ripple of restrained relief passed through the personnel. They made the window. Barely. Applause started somewhere, then stopped. It didn't feel right. Dr. Vance felt the engines in her bones. A familiar sensation. Once, she had flown missions tied directly to the system she built, sitting behind glass and instrumentation, knowing that if her code failed, people died. People had died anyway. Holt broke the silence. "You didn't have to come back." She considered that. "No, but I wanted to." "Why now?" Her answer came after a pause long enough to matter. Because the system was calling attention to itself. That usually means it's about to hurt someone. Holt absorbed that quietly. Coulter approached then, each step measured. Gone was the swagger, gone was the sarcasm. He stopped in front of her, posture rigid, voice tight. "I was wrong," he said. It cost him visibly. "I judged you before understanding you. That won't happen again." She met his eyes, saw the discomfort, the recalibration happening in real time. "It will," she said softly, "just not with me." That stung more than anger would have. She didn't stay to hear his response. She turned away, already halfway gone, because staying would mean questions, explanations, and explanations always led to exposure. As she walked, memory crept in uninvited. Thar Valley hadn't been a failure of engineering. It had been a failure of trust. Command wanted certainty. Ecoloc was built for ambiguity, for adaptive threat environments, for chaos. She had warned them. They hadn't listened. When the system locked down under conflicting commands, they blamed her, not publicly, quietly, files redacted, access revoked, her name removed from future revisions. Black Viper became a cautionary footnote. She learned then that competence didn't protect you, it isolated you. By the time she reached the hangar exit, night air washed over her, cool and grounding. She paused, one hand on the doorframe, steadying herself as old ghosts pressed close. A younger version of herself flickered in memory, confident, outspoken, certain that excellence would speak for itself. It hadn't. The base lights stretched across the tarmac, painting long shadows. She stepped into one, then another, blending back into the margins where she operated best. Behind her, Holt watched her leave. He turned to Coulter. "Assumptions," he said quietly, "are expensive." Coulter nodded once. He didn't argue. The story didn't spread through official channels. No commendations. No incident reports. But it moved anyway, through whispers in maintenance bays, through quiet corrections in briefing rooms, through subtle shifts in how people looked at those without insignia. They called it the Vance Directive. Not a rule, a reminder. Meanwhile, Dr. Iller Vance boarded a transport bound for nowhere specific. She preferred it that way. The world was full of systems built by people who never planned for humility. Eventually, they all failed. And when they did, someone like her would be called. Not to be thanked, just to fix what everyone else broke. She sat by the window as the aircraft lifted, hands resting calmly in her lap. Outside, the base shrank into abstraction. Inside, something fragile but real stirred. Hope wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It simply waited, patient, resilient, for the next moment it was needed. Why did the night feel heavier once she was finally alone? The transport aircraft vibrated softly beneath her, a low, constant hum that most people found comforting. For Iller Vance, it did the opposite. It stripped away distraction, left her alone with memory. She stared out the small, oval window as the lights of the base dissolved into darkness. No applause followed her. No escorts. Just a manifest number and a seat near the rear, exactly where she'd requested. She preferred exits without witnesses. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, but the muscles beneath the skin stayed awake. Always. Years after she'd last carried a weapon, her body still remembered readiness. That tension never left. It simply learned to live quietly. Across the aisle, two junior officers spoke in hushed tones about the launch, about how close it had been, about the woman with no rank who opened the vault like it recognized her. One of them laughed nervously, the sound brittle. "She didn't even look nervous," one said. "That's what freaked me out," the other replied. Iller closed her eyes. They always said that, as if calm meant absence of fear, as if stillness meant nothing was happening inside. If they could hear her thoughts, they'd understand how wrong they were. The aircraft hit mild turbulence. Her fingers curled slightly, instinctive, grounding. With the motion came the memory she'd been holding at bay since the hangar. Thar Valley. It arrived without warning, sharp and vivid, like a scar pulled open by weather. She remembered the dust first. Fine, invasive, clinging to skin and circuitry alike. The valley had been a narrow choke point, surrounded by ridgelines that swallowed signals and bent sound. Echolok had been installed there as a safeguard adaptive control for high-risk assets in unpredictable environments. Her system. She'd been younger then, still believed clarity could defeat ego. In the command tent, she'd argued calmly, carefully. The system needed a single authority chain. Conflicting inputs would trigger a lockdown. That wasn't a flaw, it was protection. They nodded, smiled, promised coordination. They lied. When the ambush came, panic followed. Multiple commands, overrides layered on overrides. Echolok did exactly what it was designed to do. It froze access rather than hand control to chaos. They called it a failure. She called it obedience. By the time she reached the vault that night, bodies were already being carried out. Soldiers she'd spoken to hours earlier. Pilots she'd briefed personally. The system stood silent, unmoving, faithful to its logic. She opened it then, too. The same way. Not because she'd hidden a backdoor, but because she'd understood something no committee ever would. Machines didn't respond to authority. They responded to intention. But no one wanted to hear that afterward. They needed someone to blame, someone without rank, someone whose clearance could be quietly erased. Black Viper disappeared. The transport leveled out. The present crept back in. Iller exhaled slowly, eyes still closed. She felt the familiar conflict settle into place, the quiet argument between duty and self-preservation. She could have stayed gone forever, could have let Echolok rot under revisions she'd never approve. But the vault had locked itself for a reason. Some systems didn't fail, they warned. The aircraft landed at a small auxiliary airfield just before dawn. No fanfare, no one waiting. She disembarked with a handful of others, blending easily into the flow. A hood pulled low, a badge scanned without comment. Outside, cold air bit at her face, sharp enough to anchor her fully in the present. A secure vehicle waited near the perimeter. No markings, no driver visible from a distance. She approached without hesitation. The door opened as she reached it. Inside sat a woman in her 40s, posture relaxed but alert, intelligence, the kind that listened more than it spoke. "You weren't supposed to come yourself," the woman said. Iller shrugged slightly. It was faster. "And risk exposure. Exposure is relative." The vehicle began moving, tires crunching softly on gravel. Silence stretched comfortably between them. This woman knew who she was. That mattered. It also meant conversation wasn't necessary. After several minutes, the woman spoke again. Coulter filed an internal correction. Iller's brow furrowed. A what? He amended his readiness report, took responsibility, specifically cited assumption-based error. That surprised her, more than she wanted to admit. "People rarely do that," Iller said. "People change when they're forced to see clearly." Iller looked out the window, or when they're afraid. Sometimes fear teaches what pride can't. The vehicle turned onto a service road leading toward a nondescript facility, temporary, quiet, the kind of place problems passed through, not stayed. Inside, Iller was given a small room. Clean, functional, no windows, a bed she wouldn't use, a table she might. She sat, finally allowing the tension to settle into something like exhaustion, not physical, emotional, the kind that came from carrying truth alone for too long. A file waited on the table. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at her hands. These hands had built systems that decided access, containment, escalation. She once believed control was about power. Experience taught her it was about restraint. When she finally opened the file, she felt it immediately, the same subtle wrongness she'd felt in the hangar. A different base, different vault, same pattern. Someone had modified Ecoloc, not incompetently, intentionally. A layered ambiguity introduced into the decision tree, elegant, dangerous. A trap. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't a malfunction. It was sabotage disguised as improvement. And someone had done it, knowing only one person would recognize the difference. They were calling her out of hiding. She leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Ignored, that was how this all started. In the hangar, a mop handed like an insult, a test she hadn't known she was taking. She'd passed, but the cost of being seen again was rising. She stood, packing slowly, grounding herself in movement. The old anxiety stirred, not fear of failure, but fear of consequence. Every time she stepped forward, something followed. Attention, scrutiny, loss. Still, she reached for a pen and began writing notes, quietly, methodically, because despite everything, the core of her hadn't changed. If a system was going to hurt someone, she couldn't walk away. She paused mid-sentence, a rare hesitation. How many more times would she answer the call? How many more nights would she carry the weight alone? No answer came, only the steady resolve that always followed. She finished the notes, clipped them neatly, and set them beside the file. Somewhere, another vault waited. And somewhere inside it, a system remembered her. Not as a ghost, but as its creator. Why did the room feel like it was listening to her? Iller sensed it the moment she crossed the threshold. Not surveillance, she'd long since learned how to feel that, but attention. The kind that comes from design choices layered too carefully, from systems tuned to notice patterns instead of faces. The facility wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Places like this were built to disappear in plain sight. She set the file down on the metal table and stood still, letting the quiet settle around her. Somewhere behind the walls, cooling units hummed in a cadence that was almost musical, familiar, comforting in a way that unsettled her. This wasn't a place for soldiers. It was a place for consequences. The woman from the transport entered without knocking. Same calm posture, same observant eyes. She carried no visible weapon, which meant she didn't need one. They routed the modified Ecoloc through 3 shell updates. the woman said, placing a tablet beside the file. Officially, it's an efficiency upgrade. Iller didn't look at it yet. Unofficially. Unofficially, someone wants to see what you'll do. That landed heavier than any accusation. Iller exhaled slowly. Being tested was one thing. Being baited was another. She'd spent years making herself invisible for precisely this reason, because attention always came with expectations, and expectations came with leverage. "Who signed off on the change?" she asked. The woman hesitated, just a fraction, enough. "That's classified above my clearance," she said. "But the directive came from inside the development chain, someone who understands Ecoloc well enough to alter it without breaking it." A chill threaded through Iller's chest. There were very few people who could do that. Fewer she trusted. She finally picked up the tablet, scanning the architecture map with practiced speed. The modification was subtle, elegant, almost admiring. Whoever had done it understood not just the code, but her philosophy: adaptive restraint, conditional autonomy. They'd twisted it. Inserted a moral ambiguity where none should exist. A delay node that allowed external input to override the system's protective instinct under certain emotional markers: urgency, threat escalation, command pressure. It would work until it didn't. And when it failed, it would fail publicly. They weren't just testing the system, they were testing her. Iller felt the old conflict rise again, the instinct to withdraw, to refuse, to protect what little piece she'd carved out. She paid for involvement before, paid in silence, in erasure. But there was another cost she knew too well. Walking away. She remembered a young pilot at Thar Valley. He asked her, almost casually, if the system would keep them safe. "I built it too," she'd said. He hadn't come back. Iller closed the tablet and set it down gently. "Where is the installation?" The woman's shoulders eased slightly. "Northern Corridor, decommissioned facility, remote." Of course it was. Isolation was always where truth surfaced. "I want full access," Iller said. "No observers in the room, no live uplinks. And if I say shut it down, you shut it down. No debate." The woman nodded. "I'll make the request." "Don't request," Iller corrected quietly. "Inform." Their eyes met. A moment passed. Then the woman smiled faintly. "I'll inform," she said. The facility hummed on, indifferent. Several hours later, Iller stood alone in another hangar, smaller, darker, older. This one carried history in its bones. Scratches on the floor from equipment long removed. Burn marks near the ceiling, half painted over. The modified vault stood at the center. Same steel, same architecture, different soul. She approached slowly, letting her senses adjust. The system was awake, not locked, waiting. Her heart rate remained steady, but her thoughts were anything but. Anxiety crept in at the edges, not fear of failure, but fear of recognition. If she engaged this version, there would be no pretending she was irrelevant anymore. She placed her palm against the metal. The vibration beneath her skin felt wrong. "You're not mine," she whispered. The system responded with a soft tonal shift, almost curious. Iller stepped back, circling the vault. She didn't trace seams this time. She watched patterns, microdelays in response, fluctuations in internal temperature regulation, the subtle lag in adaptive calibration. Someone had taught it to hesitate. Hesitation killed. She thought of Coulter standing recalibrated in the hangar, of Holt's quiet respect, of the young airman's apology, small moments, human moments. Then she thought of boardrooms, of polished hands signing off on risk they'd never feel. Her jaw set. She reached the interface and entered a single line of code, not an override, a question. The system paused, then answered. Confirmation rippled through the frame, acknowledgement of origin authority. Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected that, the recognition, after all this time. "You remember me," she murmured. The vault didn't open. It didn't need to. Instead, the internal architecture projected a diagnostic overlay onto the wall. A conversation, not a command. She read it quickly, absorbing the changes, the intent behind them. This wasn't sabotage born of malice. It was ambition. Someone wanted Ecolog to make decisions faster, harder, with fewer moral constraints. They wanted it to choose violence sooner, authority over protection. They wanted it to stop hesitating. Iller felt something fracture inside her, not anger but grief. For the system, for herself, for the ideals she'd built into steel and code, now being shaved down for convenience. She worked for hours, not rewriting, reteaching. She stripped away the coercive nodes, restored the original priority hierarchies, then added something new, a safeguard that couldn't be exploited without revealing the hand behind it. A mirror. If someone tried to force Ecolog again, it wouldn't lock down. It would log everything. She leaned back when she finished, exhaustion finally taking hold. Her hands trembled slightly. She let them. Pride flickered not in the work but in the restraint it represented. She hadn't turned the system into a weapon. She'd protected its conscience. Footsteps echoed outside the hangar. She straightened instinctively, composed once more by the time the woman entered. "It's done," the woman asked. "Yes." And Iller met her gaze. Someone very high up is about to learn what accountability feels like. Silence followed. The woman studied her for a long moment. "You could have walked away." "I did," Iller said. "Once, too many people paid for that." She turned toward the exit, already disengaging. The pull to disappear returned, strong as ever. She didn't belong in facilities like this. She belonged in margins, in moments. At the door she paused. "Tell them something for me," she said without turning around. "Tell who?" "Whoever thought they could improve restraint." The woman waited. Iller's voice was quiet, unyielding. "Power isn't proven by how fast you act," she said. "It's proven by how often you choose not to." She left the hangar behind, footsteps fading into the corridor. The system hummed steadily in her absence. Not faster, not louder, just wiser. And for the first time in a long while, Iller Vance allowed herself a fragile, dangerous thought. Maybe being seen didn't always mean being used. Maybe, this time, it meant being understood. Why did the victory feel heavier than the risk she'd just taken? The question followed her down the corridor, clinging to her like a shadow that refused to detach. Iller Vance walked with the same measured pace she always did, but something inside her had shifted. Not cracked, shifted, as if an internal compass had been nudged a few degrees off true north, just enough to be noticed. The facility doors closed behind her with a muted thud. Outside, the air smelled of cold metal and pine carried from somewhere far beyond the perimeter fence. Dawn was breaking, thin and pale, the kind of light that revealed flaws rather than hiding them. She stopped walking. For a moment she simply stood there, hands at her sides, breathing in the quiet. No alarms, no voices, no immediate consequence. That should have been comforting. It was. She had just placed a mirror inside one of the most sensitive security systems in the world. A mirror didn't accuse. It didn't intervene. It simply showed the truth to whoever looked closely enough. And powerful people rarely liked what mirrors revealed. A familiar anxiety crept up her spine, not panic but anticipation, the kind that came before fallout. She had lived long enough to know that the most dangerous moment wasn't during the mission. It was after, when silence returned and others began asking what it meant. She resumed walking, boots echoing softly, until a vehicle appeared at the end of the drive. The same unmarked transport, the same woman behind the wheel. "You're done faster than expected," the woman said as Iller slid into the passenger seat. "I didn't rebuild it," Iller replied. I reminded it who it was. The vehicle pulled away, tires whispering against asphalt. They drove for several minutes before the woman spoke again. There's already movement. Iller didn't ask how she knew. From where? Procurement, oversight, development. A pause. Someone's uncomfortable. Iller almost smiled. Almost. Good, she said. Discomfort means the system worked. The woman glanced at her. You're not worried. Iller considered the question carefully. Worry implies uncertainty, she said. This is consequence. They reached the edge of the facility's jurisdiction, where security thinned and the world returned to something resembling normal. The vehicle slowed. We can still insulate you, the woman offered. Reclassification, deep cover, no paper trail. It was a generous offer, a safe one, the kind Iller had accepted before. She shook her head. Not this time. Why? Because hiding had stopped being neutral, because silence had become permission, because too many systems were learning the wrong lessons. Because if they're going to pull on the thread, Iller said, I want to be the one holding the other end. The woman nodded once. She understood more than she said. They stopped at a civilian transit hub just as the morning rush began. People moved with purpose, faces half awake, unaware of how close decisions made in rooms like the one Iller had just left came to shaping their lives. She stepped out of the vehicle, blending instantly into the flow. For the first time in years, she didn't disappear completely. News didn't break the way people expected. There were no headlines, no leaks, just subtle changes. Committees delayed votes, updates stalled. A few senior officials were quietly reassigned. One retirement announcement came earlier than planned. Inside the system, the mirror worked. Every forced override attempt logged itself. Every pressure-based command left a signature. Patterns emerged, quiet ones, undeniable ones. Colonel Holt saw the data 3 days later. He sat alone in his office, the lights low, scrolling through the report with a heaviness that deepened with every page. He recognized the architecture immediately. The restraint, the elegance, the unmistakable moral spine embedded in the code. Vance. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Assumptions were the enemy of readiness. He said that in the hangar. He understood it now in a deeper way. This wasn't just about overlooking people. It was about overlooking restraint, mistaking silence for weakness, calm for compliance. He authorized the next step himself. A message was sent, not through official channels, not through intermediaries. Direct. Iller received it while sitting alone in a small apartment she'd rented by the week. The place was sparse, temporary, a habit she'd never broken. Her bag rested unopened near the door. The message was short. We need to talk, not about systems, about people. She stared at it for a long time. Part of her wanted to delete it. Another part, the quieter, more dangerous one, felt something like hope. They met in a place without insignia. No flags, no portraits, just coffee that tasted burnt and a window overlooking a city that never stopped moving. Holt looked older than she remembered, not weaker, just human. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. She raised an eyebrow, for the mop. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, for not stopping it. She studied him carefully. Years of reading micro-expressions, hesitations, the subtle tells of people who commanded for a living. He wasn't performing remorse. He meant it. I didn't intervene because I wanted to see what you do, he admitted. That was wrong. Yes, she agreed calmly. He nodded. You don't pull punches. No, she said. I pull systems back from cliffs. Silence settled between them, not awkward, reflective. There's resistance, Holt said finally, to what you did. I expected that. There's also support. That surprised her more than she let on. From who, she asked. From people who are tired of explaining casualties, as inevitabilities. She felt something tighten behind her ribs, pride maybe, or grief surfacing again. Holt leaned forward slightly. "I won't ask you to come back into the fold, I know better," he paused. "But I will ask you to advise, quietly, when it matters." The old instinct to refuse flared, to protect herself, to vanish. But something had changed. "On one condition," she said. "Name it." "I don't report to ambition," she said, "only to necessity." Holt didn't hesitate, agreed. They stood, no handshake, no ceremony. Outside, the city swallowed her again. But this time the anonymity felt different, less like exile, more like choice. That night, alone in her apartment, Iller finally allowed the exhaustion to reach her bones. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up, and closed her eyes. Ignored, that was how it had started. Anxious, that was how it had continued. Determined, broken, hopeful. She worn all of it without ever asking to be seen. And now, quietly, without fanfare, the world was adjusting around the absence she'd refused to remain. She didn't know what the next call would be, or when it would come. But she knew this. Silent resilience wasn't about endurance. It was about choosing, again and again, to act with dignity, even when no one was watching. Especially then. Why did the quiet finally feel earned instead of empty? Iller Vance noticed it late one evening, sitting by the window as the city folded itself into night. The noise was still there, traffic below, distant sirens, the low murmur of life continuing without pause, but inside her something had settled. Not resolved, not healed, just steadier. She hadn't felt that in a long time. The days after meeting Holt passed without urgency. No sudden summons, no emergencies demanding her attention. For once, the systems held, or maybe they simply behaved the way they were always meant to. She spent her time reading, walking, observing, habits she'd kept sharp during years of deliberate obscurity. Anonymity had taught her to see details others missed, how people leaned into authority, how silence bent conversations, how power often announced itself before it understood itself. She thought about the hangar more than she expected. The mop, the laughter, the way the insult had landed without touching her. Not because it hadn't hurt, it had, but because she'd learned long ago that dignity didn't require defense. It required patience. Still, patience carried a cost. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself unpacking memories she'd sealed away for survival. The pilot from Thar Valley, the look in his eyes when she'd promised safety without guarantees, the weight of knowing her work had both saved and cost lives. People liked simple narratives, heroes, villains, failures. Reality lived in the gray. Her phone vibrated softly on the table. She didn't rush to answer. Whoever it was could wait. That was new, too, the understanding that urgency didn't always belong to the caller. When she finally picked it up, Holt's name glowed on the screen. "Something happened," he said without preamble. Iller closed her eyes briefly. So much for quiet. "Talk to me." Echolok flagged an anomaly, not a failure, a choice. That got her attention. She sat up straighter. "Where?" "Forward operating site. Minimal engagement." The system delayed authorization long enough for a human override to be reconsidered. Iller felt her breath catch, and "No strike," Holt said. "Secondary intel came in during the delay, civilians in the target zone." A familiar ache pressed against her chest, sorrow braided with relief. "It worked," she whispered. "Yes," Holt replied, "and people noticed." She smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. That was inevitable. "There's debate now," he continued, "about whether restraint should be engineered." Iller let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Restraint has always been engineered. We just pretend it is." Silence stretched between them, comfortable this time. "They want you present," Holt said carefully. not as an authority, as context. The old reflex to refuse stirred, but didn't take hold. When she asked, the meeting room was nothing like the hangar. No concrete vastness, no roaring engines, just polished wood, muted lighting, and people who wore influence instead of uniforms. They watched her closely as she took a seat at the far end of the table. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. They had questions about risk, about liability, about speed versus safety, about whether machines could be trusted to hesitate. She listened. That was her advantage. She always listened first. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, unhurried, not persuasive, honest. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. A man across the table frowned. "Which would be?" "You're asking whether restraint weakens response," Iller continued. "The real question is whether unchecked authority weakens judgment." Some shifted uncomfortably. She went on. "Systems don't replace human decision-making, they reveal it. When Ecoloc pauses, it's not disobeying, it's asking if you're sure." Another voice cut in, "And if we don't have time to be sure?" Iller met the speaker's eyes. "Then you accept responsibility for speed over certainty, but don't outsource that choice to a machine and call it efficiency." The room went quiet. Not agreement, consideration. That was enough. Afterward, Holt walked with her down a long corridor lined with glass. "You changed the conversation," he said. She shrugged. Conversations change themselves when people stop pretending. Outside, the air was crisp, clean. She breathed deeply, feeling something unfamiliar bloom beneath her ribs. Pride. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need witnesses. Weeks passed. The world didn't transform overnight. It never did, but adjustments accumulated, training doctrines softened, language shifted, delay became verification, override became accountability. Some people resisted, they always would. But others listened. One afternoon, Iller received a message she hadn't expected. From Coulter. It was short, awkwardly phrased, sincere. "I wanted you to know," it read, "we changed how we onboard new tech specialists. No assumptions, no shortcuts. Thank you for the lesson." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she set the phone down. The world didn't owe her closure, but sometimes it offered something close enough. On her last night in the city, she returned to the window where this chapter had begun. Lights stretched endlessly below, each one a life intersecting with systems most people never saw. She thought about the young airmen, about the pilots who flew trusting unseen hands, about the countless individuals whose dignity went unnoticed until the moment it mattered most. She had spent years believing invisibility was safety. Now she understood it differently. Invisibility was a choice. So was presence. She didn't know how long she'd remain involved, or when she'd step back into the margins again, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her worth had never depended on recognition. It had lived in the work, in restraint, in the moments she chose to act without demanding credit. As she turned away from the window, preparing to leave the apartment for the last time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Peace. Not because the world was fixed, but because she had stopped shrinking herself to fit it. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself with rank or volume. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carrying a mop, waiting to see who confuses power with noise. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.